They called her Trouble from the moment she stepped into the dusty little town of Grey Ridge, her boots muddy, her clothes torn at the sleeve, and her eyes carrying a storm no one dared to understand. The townsfolk whispered that she was wild, reckless, unfit, and dangerous, but no one ever thought to ask what road had carved those warnings into her soul. Except for one man, the rancher named Caleb Harlow, a quiet guardian of the valley who noticed things others missed, like the way she winced when someone reached too fast near her, or how she wrapped her arms across her ribs as though protecting broken glass inside her. Trouble, her real name was Lily, had arrived on the back of an old freight truck, hopping off before the driver could ask her more questions, her heart pounding from a past she wanted to bury beneath miles of road and silence. The bruises on her skin fading, but the ones on her spirit still raw, bleeding and loud. The townspeople, hardened by gossip and boredom, decided her story before she even spoke. Runaway woman, criminal, liar, damaged goods. But Caleb looked at her like a puzzle worth understanding, not a problem worth avoiding, and that alone frightened her more than anything, because she had never known a man who looked without hunger, without judgment, without cruelty. Caleb first approached her outside the feed store, where she stood clutching a worn backpack, like it contained her last breath. The wind was cold, the sky darkening with evening, and she looked so lost that even the stray dogs paused to stare at her. He offered her a job before she asked for one, saying the ranch needed hands and he paid honest wages. Nothing more, nothing less. And though Lily hesitated, her hunger gnawed at her ribs until she finally nodded. She spoke little during the ride to his ranch, her gaze drifting to the endless stretch of winter grass and broken fences, while Caleb kept his eyes forward, not pressuring her for answers. He had seen enough hurting souls to know silence was its own language. When they arrived, she was stunned to see not just land but life, horses running free, barns standing tall, a dog barking in excitement, and a porch light glowing like a small beacon of warmth. Caleb gave her a clean room in the bunkhouse, fresh sheets, a hot meal, and a simple rule: you don't owe me your past. Just work honest, stay kind, and respect the ranch. She nodded, but that night she cried herself to sleep, burying the sobs in her pillow, afraid of peace, because peace had always been the trap before the storm. The next days were hard, not because of the labor, but because of the unfamiliar feeling of safety. She mucked stalls, cleaned tack, fed horses, and repaired fences with Caleb watching from a distance, always steady, always patient, never raising his voice, never stepping too close. One morning, as she carried hay to the barn, her shirt sleeve lifted, and Caleb saw the dark bruise blooming on her shoulder, a shape too familiar, a finger-shaped echo of violence, and though she yanked her sleeve down, his expression softened with a calm that terrified her more than anger would have. He didn't ask the usual questions. Instead, he said, "You're safe here, Lily. You don't have to hide from me." But safety was a word she did not trust, a word that had betrayed her too many times, and she snapped at him, calling him foolish for believing in broken people, accusing him of pitying her, of wanting something in return. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He simply replied, "Storms don't scare me. I've lived through my own," and walked away, leaving Lily stunned. That night, alone beneath the wide, cold sky, Lily remembered the man she had fled, the one whose fists had shaped her silence, whose rage had carved fear into her bones. She remembered running barefoot in the dark, rain pouring, her breath cutting like glass as she escaped the house she once called home. She remembered the threats that followed her into every town until she changed her name to Trouble because it was easier to be hated than pitied. But Caleb wasn't like the others. He watched her as though her bruises were not flaws, but evidence of survival, and that scared her in ways she couldn't explain. Days turned into weeks, and Caleb taught her slowly how to ride without fear, how to speak without trembling, how to stand tall even when shadows returned to haunt her. He didn't try to fix her. He simply stayed. And for a girl who had only known storms, Caleb Harlow felt like the first sunrise she'd ever seen. the first warm fire after a winter that refused to end. Yet trouble has a way of following the broken, and one cold night, as the snow began to fall, Lily's past rode into Grey Ridge covered in darkness. Forcing her to face the storm, she thought she had finally escaped. The night her past returned, the snow fell in thick, heavy flakes that swallowed the world in white silence. But Lily felt only the cold rising in her chest as the footsteps of the man she fled echoed through the quiet streets of Grey Ridge. His name was Reddick, cruel and relentless, and he had arrived with the same darkness that had once filled their home, the same voice that had shattered her confidence and chained her spirit. And when she saw his silhouette through the tavern window, every inch of progress she had made under Caleb's protection began to crumble. She panicked, dropping the supplies she had been carrying, her breath steaming in sharp bursts as she fled into the storm like a hunted animal. She didn't run toward the ranch. It was too close, too safe, too sacred to risk, so instead she sprinted toward the forest, her boots slipping in the rising snow as branches whipped against her arms and memories thundered in her skull. Reddick followed, calling her name with venom, promising punishment, ownership, reminding her of every lie he had planted in her heart. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever keep you. You're trouble, trouble, trouble." Caleb, who had gone into town to pick up lumber, saw Lily running and immediately noticed the danger behind her. He jumped off his wagon, his protective instinct igniting like wildfire as he chased after her through the snow, the wind howling, his heart beating with a ferocity he hadn't felt in years. He caught up to her near the edge of the frozen creek where she had slipped and fallen, trembling and breathless, her face pale with terror. Caleb knelt beside her, lifting her gently, whispering, "You're not alone. Lily, you're not going back to him." But before she could speak, Reddick emerged from the shadows, sneering, his voice slicing through the storm as he claimed Lily belonged to him, calling her a liar, a runaway, a burden he was there to collect. Caleb stepped in front of Lily without hesitation, his stance steady, his voice low and controlled, as he told Reddick that Lily owed him nothing, that a woman was not property, that bruises were not proof of guilt, but prison bars she had finally broken free from. Reddick lunged forward, rage twisting his features, and the fight that followed was fierce, Caleb taking blows meant for Lily, protecting her with every ounce of strength he had, refusing to back down even as the snow soaked his coat and blood warmed his skin. Lily watched, shaking, fear and courage battling inside her like two wolves. She had spent years believing she was weak, believing she couldn't fight back, but watching Caleb stand for her, bleed for her, shield her, something in her finally snapped, not into fear, but into fire. She grabbed a fallen branch, stepping forward with trembling hands, her voice cracking as she screamed at Reddick to stop, to leave, to never touch her again. Her scream wasn't soft or small. It was the battle cry of a survivor reclaiming herself. The sheriff, alerted by townsfolk who had seen Reddick arrived moments later and restrained him, dragging him away as he cursed Lily, but she didn't flinch, didn't bow, didn't crumble. She stood tall beside Caleb, her breath finally steadying as the storm within her began to quiet. Back at the ranch, Caleb tended to his bruises while Lily sat beside him, unable to stop her tears as she whispered the truth she had never spoken aloud, that she had been running from a man who convinced her she was unworthy of love, of safety, of belonging. Caleb took her hand gently and said, "Lily, storms don't define the sky. They pass, and you survived yours. Those." Words broke her, open not in pain but in healing, and in the weeks that followed, Lily blossomed into the woman she was meant to be, strong, brave, kind, unstoppable. She worked the ranch with purpose, rode the horses with confidence, spoke to the townsfolk without fear. They no longer called her Trouble. They called her Lily Harlow, not because she belonged to Caleb, but because she belonged finally to herself. And Caleb simply walked beside her, proud and steady. Their bond grew not from rescue but from respect, not from fear but from freedom. And Lily began sharing her story with other broken souls who arrived in Grey Ridge. becoming a light in the darkness she once feared. And as she stood one evening on the hill overlooking the ranch, the sun setting in gold behind the mountains, she whispered a silent promise to herself to never dim her light again, to never shrink for anyone, to never forget that survival is not shame, it is strength. And if you're listening to this story now, remember her message. Your bruises do not define you, your past does not own you, and the storm you survived has only made you stronger. And if you want more stories that lift your heart, fuel your courage, and remind you of your worth, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because your journey matters. Your voice matters, and together we rise.